Hello, everyone, and welcome to the month ahead. We are, you know, in this sort of closing time of not only the year 2024, but we're also in a closing time of a lunar cycle, just in the shorter part of the lunation for this month. I'm recording this in late November for December 2024. But we're also in a much larger closing time cycle of, what we could call the last 250 years. And while some of this has already, you know, every beginning, it's funny, the song that came to mind, you probably know it, Closing Time. There's a line in that song that says, every beginning comes from some other beginning's end. And that's really what this month about. This month in particular, December, is that every beginning comes from some other beginning's end. That on some level, everything that is becoming, that is blossoming, that is seeding, that is starting, whether it starts next year, which there's quite a few transits once we get into January, February, March, that bring in that new energy with much more full force. But the beginning itself happens in the ending itself. And so I would invite us, as we're in this time, in this closing time, I'm in the final days of this pregnancy. Who knows how long it will be until the baby arrives, but there's a liminality of it. And I've been really embracing the sweetness of its finality too, because there will once the new emerges, that which was known and in, like my life with three children and my family and the way things are now will never be known in that way again. And likewise in your own life, as this year comes to a close, and maybe you spend time really deeply reflecting on what has both shifted within your being, because I would imagine you've experienced huge growth. But often we don't notice the subtle frameworks of rebirth that happen within our own brain, you know, our ways of being, our brain chemistry, how we are working through our day, how we're responding. We don't maybe get feedback of saying, look at how good you're doing at not reacting just that little bit more. You know, we don't often get the positive validation of like, look how well you're holding yourself emotionally that wasn't really accessible for you in that relationship at the beginning of the year. And so I just want to offer that this particular time, December in particular, is such a beautiful time where we can really harvest um, the sweetness from the end. We can look back, like when I start a year, I will paint my prayers onto the front of my journal, and I will, start just keeping all of the notes and, you know, and I can go back and see, oh, that's where that idea came in, and that ceremony had that profound effect on me. Those were the days when I was struggling. There's how, there's what I was working on. It's helpful. And I'll get into the transits so you can see this in real time. Uh Even let's go back just a little bit. So this is December 1st, but here's where I'm recording it, where we have this closing cycle, closing of the moon. And I talked about this in the week ahead, so I'm not gonna talk about that here. we have this closing cycle with Venus and Pluto. We have a closing cycle with Mercury and Pluto, which will take much longer to get to. We have a longer term closing cycle with Saturn and Neptune. So there's several layers where some other beginning, some new seed, which is going to take its root in our lives, for some of us more eminently in these next few weeks, and for others of us more emergently in the new year. But some other beginning's end is happening right now, creating the space and the ground in which we can and will be able to move forward on our evolutionary journey. So let's start with December, because what we get to begin with, November 25th is when Mercury stations retrograde. And we start the 1st of December with this beautiful Sagittarius new moon. The Sagittarius new moon, however, is colored by this Jupiter-Mercury opposition. Mercury is in Jupiter's sign, Jupiter is in Mercury's sign, and we have a new moon, which is a new lunation cycle, but it's also reflective of a new beginning, like the seed of a new beginning, which we can't usually see what's happening there. And I think in the midst of this Mercury Jupiter opposition, we may not be able to understand from a resolution wise place what's happening here either. Because if the very framework of our beliefs and our ideas, if the very foundations of our faith and our emotional, our empathetic stability has been tested in this last year, which I imagine it has, tested by grief, tested by loss, tested by challenges, tested by wounds and anger, tested by, culture, life, the world, right? We're also in this place where that very same structure of reality, which has been so challenging for us to get our needs met, to find ground and stability, to be able to have a knowing of what is supposed to happen or where we're supposed to go, is kind of coming to its full clearing, right? It's like when you're not clear, when you're confused, often we can look for answers. We can ask the oracle. We can be looking inside. We can be trying to find our own guidance and not finding that. We can be finding other people's judgments, other people's ideas. We can be fearing, oh, I'm afraid that this might be what's happening, that this might be the truth. Or we can be afraid of that which is unknown. And I think with this new moon, a part of what we're harnessing here is the quality of developing a faith and optimism that's rooted in an unconditionality. If our lives have to be a certain way, if other people have to behave a certain way, if other people have to think like we think, in order for our peace, our contentment, in order for us to feel like we're living our meaningful, purposeful lives where the unique purpose that we've come here to bring is being actualized. If that requires, right, this is a T-square, if that requires everyone else to be cooperating with us, to be agreeing with us, to be doing the same thing or wanting what we want, we will ultimately find ourselves very disappointed by the world because they are not often, especially like the world as we know it, they're not necessarily going to do that. Saturn has to do with structure, form, ultimate, our own Neptune, more the ultimate reality. Saturn, our, close in life, sort of structural reality. And so much of that has been based on, well, what other people would think, or what other people would suggest, or what other people would do, or what other people believe, or what other people say, or what other people want, right? And part of what we've been learning with this Libra South node is that, we have to let go of that pattern of pleasing others in order to truly find the calling that God has within our own hearts, in order to truly find the creative purpose of our soul's journey. It's unique to you. It's not, you know, as though your neighbor or your friend or your family member doesn't also have that purpose. They just don't have the specific assignment that you do to uncover it within your own heart, to uncover it within your own vision for your life. And having vision, one of the messages I received in this last ceremony, which I think is really kind of apropos to this. Let's see if I can find the message. You know, the Sagittarius new moon, because Sagittarius can be the visionary, the vision carrier. The price of being a vision carrier is that you are often holding the vision of some aspect of love, creation, the world, that the world cannot see in darkness and fear. People won't believe it's possible. They will, uh, resist and say that they don't want it, or that they can't see how it would work. And you have to hold the faith anyway that only love is real. I'll read that again. The price of being a vision carrier is that you are often holding the vision of some aspect of love, some core calling of your heart, your soul, right? You could say it in many ways, that the world cannot see in darkness and fear. People won't believe it's possible. They will resist. They will say they don't want it or can't see how it would work anyhow. And you have to hold the faith that only love is real, right? If we have a particular capacity to vision what love would look like expressed in our own lives, right? And love looks like many things to many people in many different ways. But your particular call to love, your particular calling to be love in the world will have a very specific vision assigned to it. One in which maybe even you can't see. I don't see how it's going to work out with that relationship because I struggle so hard. I don't see how it's going to work out that I get that job, or I don't see how I have the skills to help these people just yet. Like, I'm not necessarily good enough just yet. I don't see how I'm going to overcome this sort of limitation that I keep banging up against, right? Whatever it is. And having the vision can kind of be a curse because you see the possibility of things. And then if you fact check that vision against other people's perceptions, you'll be grossly misunderstood. Maybe there will be some people who in your life are champions, cheerleaders. You can always call me. I'll tell you, you can do it. I'll tell you though that that's the cost of being a vision carrier. That what has to get cultivated, right? The T in the square, the cultivation of self-trust, self-authority, self-value is the ability to have faith in that which is unmanifested, the unmanifested expression of love in your life, right? If you have a deep desire for partnership, for marriage, if you have a desire for children or for family, if you have a desire for a creative calling or actualization in your work, if you have a desire to be living in a particular way or feeling a certain way, healed or whole, healthy, right? and that is unmanifest, and you're still in the sickness or in the aloneness or in the absence or in the grief or in the struggle of what has come before it, you're really the only one within yourself who can find that place where you have faith that love is the only true answer despite appearances, right? And that phrase, despite appearances, is really apropos to this Jupiter retrograde, Mercury retrograde, because things will have the ability to not look as though they are resolving themselves, right? They may have the ability to not look like they're going in a good direction. It might look like, wow, things are getting really, really weird here, or things are getting really challenging here. It's not necessarily the way I would have wanted it, right? That's evolutionary necessity. Often when things are happening to us or around us in our lives that are not what we would want, you know, then we can know on some level evolutionary necessity is playing out for a greater part of the plan. So that's kind of the flavor of this new moon, because it's got this element of like there's a lesson in here for us. There's a deep teaching that we can take with us that will ultimately give us the power and strength and capacity to resolve over the next several weeks, right? So Mercury is going to be retrograde until December 15th, and we'll see that as we go through the month. Or Jupiter will be wrapping up its retrograde, and then Neptune is also wrapping up its retrograde this month. And simultaneous to that, we are going to be having Mars stationing retrograde, beginning its 4-month retrograde cycle. So we've got a bit of a dance here between the vision itself, the logistical, ideological struggle that we might have been in. And then, oh, so anyway, and we can think of like Mercury has to do with communication. It has to do with, Jupiter has to do with higher learning, travel, so on a mundane level, this can really be like slowdowns and breakdowns in technology and travel, and that often happens around the holidays, but just with like, people getting stuck in airports or people having difficulties actually getting to where they're wanting to go, right? Breakdown. If the car breaks down, right, what's going to happen? You're going to have to get it fixed. And as it does break down, it reveals to you something that wasn't working for a long time, but that was in this progressive decline of its own state of functionality. And then when you figure it out and you discover what it is and you go through the process of resolving it, then you get the benefit of having something solved in your life, right? Mercury retrogrades do ultimately bring resolution. And I often find that I see their cycles start to play out even when Mercury's in its pre-shadow phase, and then the resolution comes all the way through the retrograde phase. Now with Jupiter, and Jupiter being in Gemini especially, we're working with Mercury issues relative to that Jupiter. However, we've expanded, and this can be very much like, for example, if you've been writing a book and your track of thinking for the book was, this is the story that I'm telling. And then your editor comes back and says, well, we're not totally sure that we even want you to tell that story. Like the way that it's being told, it's like, and there's a sense of maybe rejection or not approved. Not approved is kind of the thing. I think I mentioned this in the week ahead. I've submitted this one form filled out several times, not approved every single time. Now I'm waiting to see, did I do it right this time? Did I submit it correctly? I made a call. I didn't get a call back asking, well, what about this is not approved? Because I'm kind of at a loss of like, what I haven't done quite right, right? That's that Saturn like check mark. We don't see the whole thing. We don't see the clear picture of what it is that's not really right in our life. We just know that we're getting the feedback that something's not working, right? And so the retrograde process is this acceleration of the soul's growth, which is really pointing us towards solving and resolving what's not right here, what's not working here. Because from an evolutionary perspective, we have a grow beyond that's coming next year, where with Jupiter moving through the final degrees of Gemini next year, and with Jupiter moving into Cancer next year, we are going to have to grow beyond the prior limitations of our thinking around the structures of our life, especially as that relates to that square to Saturn, which will happen again next year. um, that have really only gotten us so far, right? And that's kind of the beginning stages of this new moon and this particular evolutionary cycle that we start December with, is wrestling with that sort of juxtaposition. And then here we get to the Jupiter Mercury opposition on December 4th. We have Venus who's moving towards her conjunction. Venus and Ceres are going to join with Pluto in Aquarius. And here's one of the things that about that. I don't think you're going to hear a ton of people talking about it, but I think it's one of the most important transits of the next 20 years. Ceres, I actually did a whole class series on the goddesses. I went through Venus, Ceres, Juno, Pallas Athene, and Hygeia. And you can, on my website, you can purchase that class series. It's all pre-recorded. And as a bonus, if you purchase that class series in the month of December, I will gift you a mini session to break down the goddesses in your chart, which is something that we did in that class series when it was recorded live. In January after I finish my postpartum period. So you'll have the whole month of December to get caught up on the recordings, and then we'll have a session for you specifically to just go through the goddesses in your chart and identify where they are, what the evolutionary themes are. So that's there, and I'll put um, in the description to this video, the link to sign up to purchase that class series if you're interested in that. This conjunction that they have, right? Venus has been conjoining to Pluto, you know, for in Capricorn for the last 20 years. And she's now moving her way into a new phase conjunction with Pluto in Aquarius, which she's never done before. And it's happening with the mother goddess, right? It's happening with the goddess of nourishment, protection, care, Persephone's mother. To me, that's significant because we have a relative collective environment in which capitalism, the patriarchy, all these different forces of oppression, which we would see Pluto being in this process, process of dismantling. We have those things which have basically this underlying root of not supporting the mother. So much of the devastation, the war, the violence, poverty, suffering in the world would be alleviated simply by a societal shift back to a matriarchal culture, but in the present tense, right? We aren't going back to like mothers in the wild 10,000 years ago. We're going back to mothers in the modern day who are chronically undernourished, chronically undersupported, chronically underslept, chronically challenged because they have to decide between, can I afford to go back to work or can I afford to pay for childcare? When they wouldn't be paid for that childcare, there isn't a universal basic income to care for mothers Although some countries have moved forward, like heard this thing that Sweden or Denmark has like, you know, postpartum care for mothers for 380 days of paid leave. That's amazing. That's over a year of being able to stay at home with your child with no financial pressure to go back to work, simply to nurture the first year of life of your child. So necessary, right? Functionally, that should be available everywhere in every country. The United States, like even I'm in California, and there's 6 weeks of paid family leave, but you have to have been an employee for a company. Like, I don't get that. I'm a self-employed individual. It doesn't count for me. So I'm literally going to spend the next whatever 40 days or however long I take to be with my baby with no source of income and no source of, it's like that is the way that we've set things up for mothers in our culture. And in order for a society to thrive, the least among us have to be able to thrive, right? Children have to be able to thrive. Parents have to be able to thrive. Animals and small beings have to be able to thrive, right? Those at the lowest levels of income in positions of poverty have to be able to thrive, right? Otherwise, society itself cannot thrive. All the diseases, all the struggles, all the suffering in the world emerges from that lack of stability. And so what I would imagine we're seeing um, in this conjunction here with Venus and Pluto, while it's deeply transformative to the very place in your chart. So if you have early Aquarius positions, there's something being activated here around the feminine, around mothers, relationships to mothers. There's something that you're working on. You are healing on a deep level, the matriarchal lineage, right? And we're healing it in Aquarius, which is consciousness and community, which is in connection, in unity in our humanity to all people. And on the same day, this conjunction between these three, we have also Mars stationing retrograde. So we add a layer of these retrograde planets. So then we've got um, Chiron retrograde, Uranus, Jupiter, Mars, Mercury, and Neptune, who will be stationing direct soon. And when we start to see this many planets that are working retrograde, we can really understand that all these different areas of life are going through a deep acceleration of their soul growth in order to wrap up a cycle. They're seeming to go backwards in the sky, but they're really what they are doing is they've changed their motion, right? And so in a sense, we kind of have to change our motion relative to if we've been trying to move things forward in our life, if we've been struggling in some way around what we need in order to create enough stability in our life to thrive. What kind of community do we need? What kind of support do we need? Who do we need to really recognize our kinship with, that we can start to work on building the relationships of trust that we need in order to most authentically be ourselves, in order to most powerfully bring out that which is inside, right? That love that I was talking about in our vision. And, this Mercury retrograde, this Jupiter retrograde, this Mars retrograde, I think is really going to be helping us to work out, how do I use that creative power? How do I use my words? How do I use my vision in order to bring forward what I deeply need and require in my life in order to be who I'm being called to become, right? Because we can't really reference the past anymore for who we are. And nor do we want to. I can imagine there are parts of yourself that you can say, yes, I love that about myself. I'm being who I want to be, right? And we can celebrate that. But these are the places I'm talking about in our life where we're really struggling with not having that necessary experience, where there are blocks, there are obstacles, limitations, where there's grief, where there's challenges, where there are conflicts of faith and interest, you know, or faith and experience, or, you know, belief and ideas at conflict. And so then, this is pretty much the kickstart for me. This we're also here at the first quarter moon cycle, which I think from an evolutionary perspective is one of the most important phases. Um, so Jeffrey Wolf Green says with the first quarter phase, he says Dane Rudyard called this phase a crisis in action. This is quite true because the key evolutionary gate course correlates to the need to establish and make real the new evolutionary patterns reflected in the new phase. Remember, we had that new moon in Sagittarius. There's some new impulse, new vision that's emerging. And the fear of failure, sliding back into old patterns, is now very intense. These fears create a crisis in which the soul will attempt to try on many hats. What do I need to do? How do I need to figure this out? What do I need to work out? Which hat is it becomes the essence of the crisis. At the first quarter square, the individual meaning becomes to establish a new form to operate through, to be fully actualized or established within the individual, right? This is depending on, for example, he says if Mercury were square Pluto, this new form, and Mercury is not square to Pluto, but Mercury is square to Saturn. So let's just call that what it is. Very, very close. A new intellectual system of organization resulting and the resulting opinions. The new form would evolve by analysis of the intrinsic weaknesses and deficiencies in the prevailing intellectual systems. Creative tension is produced through the process of moving forward with this new form versus the compulsive temptation to slide back into old patterns. Right? I can see how this works in my own life. I created the entire website for the association, the Jeffrey Wolf Green Association of Evolutionary Astrologers. That is all my creative capacity over the last 2.5 years. And it has pretty much become unfunctional because of the bottom line infrastructure of the company that is, that I created the website on. And their unwillingness and complete inability to resolve the issue, which in my mind was a very simple issue and a mistake that they made. They've been totally unwilling to do that, has prompted me to have to find and fix and look for other, while restructuring and reformatting things and potentially having to redo the entire website and a new platform. I'm not here yet where I know what I need to do, but I am in this place where there's a crisis. Like, I want to use the old system because I'm very familiar with it. There's a part of me that just wants to like buy into their issue and resolve it and do, even though I know it's wrong, even though I know that they made a mistake, but standing in my rightness isn't getting it resolved, and they're completely unwilling to acknowledge that their policies or that they made a mistake. So what do, right? When you're locked in a conflict with someone where beliefs and ideas, where structural and systematic things are like preventing you from moving forward, how do you resolve it? That's kind of the crux of this first quarter square that we're at. And then we get to the moon in Aries, moving through its conjunction to the North Node. We will find ourselves as we move through, there's not going to be very many more of these lunar cycles where the moon's conjoining with the north or south node, because we're getting very close to the end of this particular transit. The nodes of the moon transit in a sign for around 18 months, and they will be leaving Aries and Libra and entering the mutable signs of Virgo and Pisces, right? So the north node will be in Pisces and the south node will be in Virgo. That's a significant shift for us here. I've been feeling the weight of that shift now for several months. Um, and I think it's significant, especially because we're coming to the end of this culminative cycle with Saturn and Neptune, which I talked a little bit about in my Saturn special video. But as we move through this month, and as we move through um, each, and I'll do my best as I can to resume the week ahead after the baby comes, and we'll see. I don't know how long it'll take me to be back at it. We move towards this full moon, this Gemini Sagittarius full moon cycle. So there's something in that conflict that we've been trying to resolve where we finally do get to a place of dynamic tension, right? We finally maybe do get to a place. This full moon squares Neptune. So it moves the T square from Mercury, Jupiter, with Saturn at the T, to Sun, Moon, right, who are ruled by Mercury and Jupiter, with Neptune at the T. And what that tells me is that Neptune becomes the focal point for that ultimate meaning, that resolution, that core and central sense of, um, you know, you ever had an experience where everything's going wrong or things don't seem to be the way that they are meant to be, and you're really struggling with it. And then later you look back and you see, like, wow, if that hadn't all gone awry, I would have never arrived at this conclusion. I would have never arrived at this destination. I would have never experienced this, you know. And then Neptune stations direct, right? So there's and also Mercury stations direct as well. So it's like, oh, wow, that is why, right? The divine plan for most of us is not accessible in our minds because it's bigger than what we can see. And the loss of faith, the disillusionment often happens when things don't meet our, you know, whether it's an ego identified expectation or it's our reference point of the past, what we think should or shouldn't happen. There were things that I was wanting to happen all year long that just never happened. And I had a lot of grief. I can still feel it now. And when I got in the grief and in the disillusionment process of that um lack of fulfillment in the way that my heart was calling for, has been ultimately one of the most powerful cultivations of my character as a woman. And I don't know what it's going to mean for my life next year or like my relationships, for my work. Um, but I can definitely say that I I am, more deeply in my relationship to God as a result of that, more deeply in a relationship to my source, to who I am. And of course, like here, I'm crying. There's still grief there, you know? There's still um there's still confusion. There's still uncertainty as to what comes next. But I find myself in much more peace, about it. Much more acceptance and trust. Um, and it just is what it is. And that has allowed me to have a lot more empathy and a lot more space. And it has given me a capacity to have greater understanding of there's some greater reason why this isn't happening right now. Like, I don't know why that is, but um I'm still, coming to find that within myself. Um, yeah, so, that all of that happens this month. And we really, I mean, I think for the rest of the month, there's like more and more resolution, right? As we get to the sun's shift into Capricorn. Um, this is in the northern hemisphere, the winter solstice. Um, in the southern hemisphere, it's the summer solstice, 0 degrees Capricorn, right? But for us here in the northern hemisphere, this is like deep winter, the initiation of winter. Aquarius is fixed winter, in from a seasonal perspective. And there's something that starts to follow at this time we start very soon to enter into a season where there's a shift in light and dark. So much of the holidays that come after this point. So we have the solstice, this marks the seasonal change. And then a few days later, um, we will have we'll have the Libra moon in a last quarter square to the Capricorn sun. That is again, that'll be the final of that. That won't happen again in this nodal configuration for another um wow, 18 years. Yeah. So this is like some beginnings end is right there, right? If we think about, it's going to be 18 years before this form of this lunation, last quarter square on the nodal axis will happen. And then we get um a few days later, December 24th, December 25th, Christmas Day, which is also the first day of Hanukkah this year, the Jewish celebration of the light. And it was really both holidays, whether Christian or Jewish, represented a miracle, something that people believed could not happen, would not happen, right? Remember when I was talking about that Mercury retrograde? People resisted, people had a lot of conflict. The oil ran out in the temple. If you were believing in reality, you would believe that it would not last, that there would not be enough, right? You would believe in scarcity. And the birth of Jesus, which I don't necessarily know happened on December 25th, and definitely we've commercialized it to become a holiday of purchase and consumption, and not necessarily a remembrance of that which is holy and sacred that starts in a very small way, right? Humble beginnings. Humble, we all, every human being on this planet starts in the humble beginning of being a newborn, of having no name, no identity, no track record in the world, no status, no nothing. We all start with the poopy diaper and, a basic little tiny body that has to evolve and emerge into the soul and the soul reality of who we're meant to be. And we can certainly be judged and conditioned by who people think we should be, right? Who your parents thought you were going to be, or who your, your family thought you should be, right? But the reality is that we're always, no matter what, going to have a truer, deeper soul calling of who we are actually meant to be, who God created us to be. We could say that isn't defined by what people think of us. That isn't defined by what, you know, and the miracle is when we start to really discover that light within ourselves. The miracle is when the circumstances that seem to be dire outlast themselves, right? When it's like, I've been so many times in my life where I was down to my last dollar. I had no money, I had no way. There was like nowhere to go, nothing to do, no way out, you know. But in those ways, grace has always made a way. You know, things have always come around. Things have always changed. My struggle has usually been in when I resisted or was in a lot of fear about those changes. But we can really see, if you look back at enough times in your life that you're still here today, regardless of what trauma or what aftermath you might have had to kind of heal your way through, that a way is made, and I think our resolution comes in this time too. Here, December 28th, we've got Mercury just, going through its final opposition to Jupiter here, the day after Christmas, the second day of Hanukkah. We get this Jupiter Mercury opposition. So Jupiter is still retrograde, but Mercury is direct. And then, we start to come around to this Sagittarius moon at the end of December that closes this lunar cycle, right? We close December. We open December with a new moon in Sagittarius, and we close December with a new moon in Capricorn, which to me indicates that some formal new structure is being birthed out of the process of evolution that we've gone through. And we also get pretty close here to the Pluto. Here, Pluto in Aquarius is moving to its opposition, its second opposition with Mars. Here's the Pluto-Mars opposition. That starts our year off on January 1st. This will be the retrograde opposition, probably one of the most important. Whenever a planet is retrograde and it makes 3 passes to another planet, I consider that the retrograde pass is the most significant or influential of the cycle. It's kind of like the beginning of the story, the climax of the story, and then the culmination of the story. The retrograde opposition, the retrograde square, whatever is happening in that when a planet, and in this case, I'm talking about Mars opposite Pluto, which we had the first one. We had the first opposition was actually 29 degrees Capricorn to 29 degrees Cancer. Mars was in Cancer when it made the first opposition to Pluto. The second one is 1 degree Aquarius to 1 degree Leo. And that starts off our January 1st. So that's a big shift, my friends. And I'll talk about it when we get to the January month ahead. A couple of things I want to say in closing about December. I have a online course called Foundations of Astrology, which is built entirely about understanding your natal chart. The wheel of your chart, we go through all the polarities. So we start with Aries, Libra. We go through, sign by sign, house by house, first house, seventh house, and cover the entire natal chart. It's available for you now that you can register in the month of December and listen to all the pre-recorded content, all these classes where I taught the archetypes, the planetary rulers, the planetary oppositional pairs, and framed it within understanding your own natal chart. And if you sign up for that now, you will get a bonus. I'm giving $100 off of that class series. That's my year-end gift. And that will include an integration class that we'll do in January to go through your natal chart and put those pieces together. So, possibilities for you to do that work during this fallow time of the year. Know that one, it's providing nourishment and care and support to me and to my family as I'm in this newborn phase doing these classes during that time. And then you're getting extra special attention from me in the new year to support your integration of the learning. Um, these are wonderful classes. The Foundations Level 1 is also a prerequisite to my upcoming class series next year, Foundations 2, where we'll be going into advanced planetary aspects. We'll be going into planets that are on the nodal aspect, and we'll be going into family and relational synastry. So, how my chart interacts with yours, how your chart interacts with your partner, how like we'll be looking at the very core work of the soul as it relates to being in relationship with other people next year. But you need to have completed Foundations Level 1 in order to join me in that class to do the advanced practice. Um, yeah, so if that's something that you'd be interested in doing, all of the links are in the description to this video and in the post on the website. You can sign up for those classes. You can take advantage of the early bird discount. If you're one of my students who was in Foundations of Astrology Level 1, you can use that early bird discount to sign up for Level 2, which will begin in 2025. And feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. My response time will most likely be a lot slower in this in this time of quiet and hermiting with my newborn, who will arrive hopefully any day now. And I look forward to being with you guys again very soon. I hope that you have a really blessed end of the year, that you use this time um, to nourish in the darkness and really reflect on the growth and on the evolution that you have experienced, because you have grown so tremendously in this year. And it's worth taking the time to recognize and see that within yourself and to celebrate that as a part of celebrating the miracle, right? That all the things that you think can't be done in your life that can be done, that are being done now, and whether or not you see them. May you be blessed with a richness of joy and support and love in this closing time. And I look forward to seeing you again very soon, my friends. Bye for now.